Welcome to the Plant Cunning Podcast,
where we explore a relationship to plants, other people, and the mysteries of nature.
Coming to you from the high Allegheny Plateau in central New York.
We are your hosts, A.C. Stauble
and Isaac Hill. Welcome to another episode of the Plant Cunning Podcast. Today on the show we have herbalist, mycologist, and alchemist Jason Scott from Feral Fungi. And today on the show we talk about mycology, the state of the mushroom supplement industry, and we get into some esoteric subjects of hermetic alchemy and mycology in that intersection, getting into the planetary correspondences of various mushrooms and a lot of very fun topics. So I think that you're going to enjoy the episode. And before we get into it, I just want to thank everybody who listens to the show, who gives us 5-star reviews, who comments and shares, who is a patron of us on Patreon. That really helps. It's kind of like a tip for us. Also, if you would like to get a reading with me, a Vedic astrology reading, you can do so by emailing me at info@plantcunning.com. We will look at your birth chart as a map of your karma, and it's a very powerful modality, and I'm feel very privileged and honored to be able to share this with all of you. So email me to get a reading scheduled. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the episode.
Today on the Plant Cunning Podcast, we are very excited to have Jason Scott of Feral Fungi. Jason is a mushroom guy, mycologist. He's a writer. He is a teacher and has the incredible product line of mushroom medicine, Feral Fungi. So welcome to the show, Jason. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm super excited to be here and chatting with you guys this morning. I've been looking forward to this, so.
Yeah, us too. I mean, you do all this wonderful work with mushrooms and spagyrics, which is a really interesting niche and a really interesting avenue to go on. And you know, you're a student of Hermeticism and all these wonderful things too. So it's really it's a great intersection.
Definitely.
So, as you said, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
Jason, generally our first question is something like, what brought you to the plant path? But you know, you're also more of the mushrooms and the hermeticism and alchemy. So what, I mean, it's all wrapped up together. But what brought you to this path?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question and it's fundamental, and I think it's always one that I have a challenging time answered in a condensed manner, because I think you could pull at so many different threads and things along the way that are kind of like, oh, this led to that led to that, and I always like to say there's no such thing as coincidences, but I'll do my best to kind of summarize it for you.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I really latched on to mushrooms probably about 16, 17 years ago now, when I had sat with psilocybin mushrooms for the first time, you know, and I didn't really have that much of a connection, but something just kind of like grabbed onto me with them, and, you know, got really fascinated with like cultivation. And shortly after that, I stumbled across the radical mycology convergence, which was the first radical mycology convergence that happened in Tonasket, Washington. I think that was in 2010, maybe 2011, up there. But that really just kind of took a spark and kind of ignited it into a fire of passion for fungi, everything from ethnomycology to cultivation to biology of fungi. And there was just all of these different dynamics that I was looking at. At the same time, I was trying to figure out what my life path was, and um, I was really drawn to natural medicine, both through kind of like an ethnobotanical model of like cultural relationships to plants, especially with like entheogens, but also just more broad entheogenic or ethnobotanical relationships, and how different cultures relate to different plants and work with different plants. And so uh, I started kind of casually picking up here and there, like, oh, this plant is kind of used for this, and this plant is kind of used for this, and the very sort of like uh, gateway herbalism, I might call it, of kind of like starting to learn the potentials of different herbs and how they can be beneficial. And I spent some time in Hawaii. I spent some time studying on some really precious land out there and getting to learn more in depth on ethnobotanical principles. And I mentioned we were talking before this call about the Hoh rainforest and how it's this
Mhm.
like hotbed of life, and Hawaii for me is that way as well. It's just like everything grows there, and I got to spend some time in this ethnobotanical garden up there that there was plants from all over the world, and it was kind of like they were referred to it as an ethnobotanical gene bank,
Wow.
up at the top of this pala in Hawaii, and just
Mm.
got to be around all of these really amazing plants, and ultimately kind of had this experience where uh, I was guided to just learn more about the plants here on this earth and learn more about the mushrooms. It was a very visceral kind of calling where I think I was like looking for this vision or looking for something out there, but really what happened was kind of like, hey, no, like it's right in front of you. Look at the plants, look at the medicines, understand the earth. And then right after that experience, I was given two books almost immediately after that experience. One on alchemy by Robert Allen Bartlett, called Real Alchemy, and there's a follow-up to that called Way of the Crucible, and then one on Ayurveda, and I can't remember who the author of that one was. I think it was one of Vasant Laud's books
Hmm.
at that time. And at that time, I didn't really know what that would evolve into, but it did really inform kind of the next steps of my life. And at one point, I came back from Hawaii to the Pacific Northwest, and somebody was teaching a class on herbal alchemy at a little cool cafe place in Southwest Portland. And um, I went and checked it out, and he kind of went through this whole class, and it was talking about a lot of the principles that I was reading about in that book. And then at the very end, he's like, "Oh, and I just learned all this from my teacher, Robert Bartlett, up in Marysville, Washington." And I was like, "Oh, that's the guy who wrote this book that was given to me not so long
Oh.
ago." And long story short, I got in contact with them, and then I started studying with Robert, I think in 2012, up in Washington. I was like young, kind of like vagabond hippie kid, with I think I like built them a fence to take their class, and
Oh.
ended up spending a lot of time with Robert in the lab. And then through that, just wanted to deepen my herbal knowledge even more, connected with my good friend Seja Popham at one
Mhm.
of the first classes I took up there. And I was actually just talking to somebody yesterday, just like the generative force that has come out of Robert's orbit is really fantastic, of the people that I know and the influence that they've had in the world of alchemy. But that was kind of where it started, in a nutshell, I would say. And yeah, there's a lot more like pieces and dynamics to it. I could go on for a really long time, but maybe I'll like leave that kind of
Mm.
generative story there.
I love that coincidence. I'm using air quotes here, but of like getting receiving that book and then going to that class and yeah, being able to work with Robert in the future. That's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, big fan of saying that I don't really believe in coincidences, so I appreciate you using it
Hmm.
as like air quotes, because it's like
Hmm.
so many coincidences look more like synchronicities, when you
Yes,
really
definitely.
understand them.
Hmm.
Yeah, someone was saying, "Hey, this is your teacher. You got to meet this guy."
Yeah,
Exactly. That's so cool.
yeah. Robert Bartlett is like probably one of the most humble human beings that I've ever met, and he's also
Hmm.
just one of the most knowledgeable, and like has the like my experiences up there will never be matched, and they're so modest in so many ways, but he does such a great job of mixing kind of like the philosophy and the understanding of the Hermetic path, and kind of like all
Hmm.
these different dynamics of alchemy with the traditional laboratory work.
Hmm.
So he's really foundational, I think, in a lot of people's modern understanding of what alchemy was. But he studied at Paralabs back in the day, which was a research, like a Paralabs and the Paracelsus Research Society, which was kind of like a cohort in Salt Lake City, Utah, that was education on alchemy taught by his teacher, Frater Albertus. And Robert he was working there. He wanted a job at the lab, and Frater Albertus had come to him and was like, well, go back to school for chemistry, get your degree in chemistry, and then come back and work in the lab. So Robert also has this really interesting perspective too, where not only is he understand the philosophical underpinnings of the alchemical path, and then like the practical applications of how to do a lot of the more complex lab work, but he also
Mhm.
has that chemistry knowledge as well to understand what some of those chemical processes are like. He also, because of that, had access to labs through
Mm.
most of his career, where he was the chief scientist and was calibrating all their equipment. And so, like, while he was cleaning equipment or while they were in between runs of their normal stuff, he would just like throw a sample of oil of antimony in there, or like throw a sample of oil of gold in there. And so he's got these like tomes of analytical data on all of these different alchemical remedies. And so my my kind of jump into Hermeticism was really through that, and I really dove in head first. So he had kind of had three classes that he offered right off the bat, which were his prima, secunda, and tertia. Prima being kind of like the vegetable works or the plant works, secunda being like the mineral and animal works, and then tertia being like the metal works class. And he's since expanded to a lot of different things, but I also just got to spend a lot of time hanging out with him late nights in the lab and checking out some cool experiments that he was running on the side, or like working with him on different projects, or I kind of helped them with like the alchemy conference that we had back in the day.
Cool.
Um, which also just kind of like deep into, because one thing I'm really excited to talk to you guys about is kind of like the planetary correspondences
Yeah.
piece and the doctrine of signatures, and because that's just been so influential for my understanding of herbal medicine and mushroom medicine. And when I started, I remember getting just like lists, or like looking at uh Culpepper's Herbal and just being like, and this is related to Mars because obviously it's related to Mars. And I was like, well, why? Like, why is it related? And
Right.
so I got the opportunity and kind of Seja Popham has been really good at kind of laying out a lot of frameworks for looking at the energetics of herbs and medicine. And so I did a lot of work with him. And I remember he did a workshop at the Alchemy conference that was kind of like looking at the principles, the elements, and then the planetary correspondence of herbs, and just helped me to kind of like dive into much more of like a relational understanding.
Yeah.
Because so many people are like, oh, it's just related with this planet because that's traditionally what it's related with, versus like, oh yeah, but if you really understand kind of like these core archetypes, and then you're looking at the plant, then it's like a qualitative relational understanding.
Yeah,
Mm.
definitely. Yeah, so it was more like the mushrooms sent you to your alchemy teacher. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I would say like when I really look back on it, I think that the mushrooms have been generative for a lot of the things that I do, and also kind of like even the business. I'm a lot of times like, why am I doing this? And I'm like, they kind of have a part in this of
Yeah.
like, there's something about it that's not like driven by me wanting to do the thing. It's kind of like I say, a lot of it sort of happened by accident. A lot of it, I'm like, why am I still doing this? But I know there's like a purpose to it as well.
Yeah.
I
And
feel
it,
that so hard.
and it's also interesting, like, when you're doing the ethnobotanical studies, you're like interested in ethnobotany, as a inmate of this industrial Western civilization, what's our ethnobotanical schema, and it's
Yeah,
Culpeper, it's Paracelsus, it's that lineage, um,
yeah,
and then also getting to spend time with Robert, outside of just the classes. I think that's really the crucial bit in this, like, this golden chain of initiation, really,
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think I've kind of always been, I don't know if like lucky in that way, but I was thinking about it the other day, and it's like I don't really have idols that I don't really like know personally, or that I don't really like
Yeah.
have a relationship with. And so I feel like I've always been really lucky to like the teachers that I've really connected with and like learned from. I've also been able to form really meaningful relationships with them. And so a lot of my teachers have become friends, and that's been a pattern for me since high school. And so it's like yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, it to me, the whole thing, the whole path, it's all about what is like our legend, what is our story. And it's like whenever I kind of teach about alchemy, I like to start with the history, even if I do just like a really abridged version, because that history brings it all the way up into context where it's like here's everything, and then it's Frater Albertus, Robert, and then here we are as like the next generation kind of like perpetuating what's coming after. So for me it helps to kind of put it into that context.
Yeah, and Frater Albertus, I mean, he's the one who wrote the Spagyrics, like that classic book on Spagyrics, right?
The yeah, Spagyric's Handbook, I think it was, or Handbook I've got it behind me here somewhere,
Yeah, I've
but
got my other room.
yeah, Handbook of Alchemy, and multiple other texts. Some of his texts are really hard to come by and
Mm,
fairly obscure, but that was the other thing. I met one of Robert's colleagues. His son was at the first class that I ever took, and I've formed a close relationship with him over the years too. And he's just has a bunch of this stuff from Freight Alberta. So when I wasn't spending time with Robert, I was hanging out down in Southern Oregon with him. And he'd be like, "Hey, here's like I can't remember. There's a book that kind of reminds me of um I think it's called Gently I Answered, which is kind of like this philosophical discourse between a young man and Frater Albertus, and they're like sitting, like looking at the ocean and then like talking about these philosophical underpinnings of life. And but you can't find that book anywhere.
Oh.
So I really grateful to kind of have that opportunity too to see some of those things and be influenced by them early on.
yeah, and so to get to that, the Doctrine of Signatures and planetary and plant and mushroom correspondences, which is something I'm also very interested in. I've been doing a deep dive into that too. Um, working on my zodiac garden and like how do you what under really understanding the correspondences, and some
Yeah.
of them are very easy, some of them are a little bit harder to
Some are multiple.
yeah, and then there's also like
Yeah.
there's like this for this, but this for that, and this for that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
also,
totally.
how so working with mushrooms especially too, there's not very much information from from the traditional texts. So how did you figure that out too?
Yeah, well, I mean, to your first point, I really look at the Doctrine of Signatures and Correspondences as more of an art than a science, and I
Mm,
look at it as a relational art. There's a quote from Paracelsus that's always really stuck with me. That's basically like, if you understand the qualities of Venus, you understand the qualities of Artemisia, and if you understand the qualities of Artemisia, then you understand the qualities of Venus. And
Mm.
what that is saying to me is like, oh, this is this relational understanding. And so we're not looking at these isolated parts of a whole. We're looking at their relationships and the ways that they work together and the ways that we can understand how those relationships teach us more about each of them. And so that was a really important underpinning for me, because it's like it takes this kind of like what can be this fun, sort of philosophical, sometimes pretty ethereal thought exercise,
yeah.
and really ground it into something meaningful. And so I really used it as a tool as I was working with the mushrooms too, to understand them more specifically. Because, you know, I felt like when I was looking at into medicinal mushrooms when I first started, it's like, here's reishi, it's good for everything. Here's lion's mane, it's good for everything. Here's,
Yeah.
turkey tail, it's good for everything. And you get these laundry lists of like all of their medicinal actions. And when I was like studying herbalism at that time, and also kind of from the Ayurvedic perspective, I'm like, oh, how do we get really acute with our healing mechanisms? Like, how do we like really get to the point of what we're trying to heal and be really effective with the medicines that we're using? And so I kind of used that relational understanding of the Doctrine of Signatures and Correspondences to not only understand the mushrooms better, but like more in depth for what their specific uses were. But to your point, I didn't really find anything at that time. I mean, I couldn't find anything on mushrooms and alchemy, kind of like as a whole, and I also couldn't find anything on mushrooms and the Doctrine of Signatures and Correspondences. I think I have one copy of like an illustrated version of Culpepper's Herbal that um and I'm assuming most of your listeners probably know what that is, but it's one of the oldest texts on herbal medicines and one of the oldest materia medicas, and they include the doctrine of signature for each plant in there, oftentimes without much explanation. It just kind of is like, it's of Mars because that's what I said it was. And um
Mm-hmm.
and I have one copy. I haven't seen it in all the copies, but one copy where he mentions the agaricus mushrooms, and I
Mm.
think he says that it's ruled by Mars and Aries, and then doesn't elaborate and says don't consume it. And so, I think we've inherited a large amount of uh, mycophobia from a lot of the Western culture. And even with my practice in Ayurveda, I saw somebody the other day post and say like people in Ayurveda use mushrooms, and they actually didn't, because Ayurveda views mushrooms in much that same light. It's like mushrooms are oftentimes associated with death. They don't really work with fungi as a
Mm.
part of their like natural materia medica. Um, and so when I was kind of like delving down this path of learning about herbs, learning about mushrooms, there's this alchemical underpinning, and the mushrooms were kind of at the forefront of all of it. And and I was kind of like, okay, where do the mushrooms fit into this picture? And that was kind of the work that um as I was looking at Robert's kind of class and looked at how most of like traditional alchemical information is organized, it's kind of like you have these realms, and you've got the vegetable realm, you've got the animal realm, and you've got the metallic realm. And I was like, well, yeah, but right in between the vegetable and the animal should be fungi. And
Right.
so like what does it look like to think about fungi as their own? Because it's like from the vegetable works to the animal works, you're using different types of solvents, and you're doing using different types of techniques to yield the same principles. Um, and so that was kind of like the start of it. And as I started developing those relationships, I also helped my friend Peter McCoy with a workshop in Portland on mushroom cultivation, and started talking to him about it. And he was like, "Hey, you should write an article about this for Radical Mycology." And I think probably started writing that like 2013 or 2014, and then he published the book in 2016.
Mm.
And so I've got a small section in there, and a huge portion of it was like I spent a lot of time on my own and also working with him, just doing all these different experiments, looking at the myceliated grain and looking at the fruit bodies and looking at the mycelium growing in like a petri dish for like what the kind of archetypal patterns look like. And I was
Cool.
looking at the fungi all the way around
Yeah.
to be like, okay, like what's their physiological action? What's like the energetics that are associated with it? What do they look
Mhm.
like from the fruit perspective? What do they look like when they're growing the mycelium? What do the extracts look like? What extracts are feeling most potent? Like what happens when you ferment and distill a mushroom? And so um there was a lot of research and development that kind of like went into that, and that was just out of a personal excitement, but a huge portion that came out of there, which again, I also say that Doctrine of Signatures and Correspondences is somewhat of a moving target. So the mushrooms I found to be so complex, right? I think most things are pretty complex,
Mm.
but especially the mushrooms, I usually do like a secondary or tertiary correspondence with them as well.
Mhm.
Hmm.
But I would say for most plants, you could probably also
Yeah.
do that sort
Absolutely.
of
Yeah.
thing. And then but one of the things that generated out of that work was a chart that I made that was like a doctrine of signatures and correspondences and fungi.
Mm.
That's in the Radical Mycology book, and then Robert Rogers used it in his Mushroom Essences
Oh,
book as
cool.
well. And
It's
yeah, I look
awesome.
back at it and I'm like, oh, I would change some of these things now. But the whole
Mm.
point of that article was to get a conversation started. It was like, hey, like, why aren't people talking about this specific portion? Like, let's
Mm.
get a conversation going about it. And so it was more to just like have more people to talk to about it, I suppose. Like get more
Yeah.
people
Mhm.
kind of like having a conversation and thinking about it in a different way and exploring it philosophically.
Yeah, you made a
Um,
chunk, but it's not like set in stone, you know?
yeah,
So, and it's like as you learn more things and observe more things and keep experimenting, you might, yeah, have certain changes of opinions about a certain correspondence or tertiary correspondence.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and that's one of the such the beautiful things too about the doctrine of signatures and correspondences. And then when you apply it to the practical spagyric work, is like you can again, I look at it like an art where it's like you have these paint brushes and these like different this palette of paints, which is your planets and your extraction processes and all these different things, and then you can really like craft such intentional medicines. Like I know you guys know some stuff about like with some of the planetary talismans and things like that, and it's like you can do that with the medicine that you're making and like
Mhm.
distill it at a certain time to capture this
Yeah.
planetary energy and like bring it
Yeah.
all down and like capture it. And it's like um is it always practical? No. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I think, that's kind of like one of the core teachings that I've taken, right? Is like you can make these extremely complex and effective medicines, but ultimately, if somebody's like on their deathbed and needs something immediately, you're not going to be like, hold on, we have to wait for this planet to line up, right? It's like you gotta
Right.
kind of get them what they need. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, there's kind of like I mean, not, somewhat of a law of diminishing returns or like an 80-20 rule or something like that, where it's like you can get too complicated. And sometimes that really complicated stuff is like the most powerful stuff that ever
oh
existed.
yeah,
For, for practicality's sake, it's.
It's special. It's like the special stuff. Maybe you have your like magical
Yeah.
product line and then your like standard double extract, you know.
exactly. Yeah, and I mean that's kind of how I do it from the business because with that is like you can get extremely detailed. Like you could be distilling water to collect the different principles of the water and the different elemental correspondences of the water and
Oh my gosh.
do it gets really deep, and it's like it's infinite, and if you try
Yeah.
to do all of it you would probably like lose your mind. But even doing more complex spagyric extractions on a commercial scale is just not practical. So I think it's like when I look at what we're doing with feral fungi, it's like, okay, well, first I started it by accident. I was actually teaching at a conference up in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know if you guys know Catamaran Marcus with
Yeah.
Rosarium,
Yeah.
and Marcus, a wonderful blacksmith, but I've known them for quite some time. And I helped them with the first couple Viridis Genii conferences that we had up here in the Pacific
Cool.
Northwest. And they had me teaching at one, and they're like, "Hey, here's a free booth." And I think the year before, I had brought these like two, like, I was like, well, I got to get something together. And I had like two tinctures and I like handwritten labels that we did like the night before. And so the next year, I was teaching a class on the doctrine of signatures and correspondences, specifically related to fungi. So we kind of went through the whole pattern and the archetype of the fungi. And I was like, I'm gonna make something really special. I'm gonna do a line of spagyric tinctures, which was kind of like the first work that we learned in Robert's class too. So this is another place where it all kind of like comes full circle. But I was like, I'm gonna do a line of seven tinctures, one ruled by each of the inner seven planets to correspond with each of the day of the week, and make what was known from Robert's class as like an initiatic set of spagyric tinctures. And what
Cool.
the goal is that you're creating a relational medicine, but you're also like aligning the different parts of the body because each one kind of corresponds to different excuse me, corresponds to different energetics, corresponds to different um, archetypes, corresponds to different body systems, and so
So were those fungi or herbal or a combo?
fungi,
Mm.
purely fungi, yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
Cool.
Yeah, I previous to that I'd been working, doing some stuff with Seja in his lab at Organic Unity at the time. Shared some land with them in Southern Oregon and was working in that lab. And I remember I kept like being like, "Hey, let's do mushrooms. Hey, let's do mushrooms." And he's like, "Yeah, yeah," but really busy with the education side of things. And then
Mhm.
and then I kind of like went to Nepal and then came back, and I was like not really sure what I was doing, and then started that. And I didn't anticipate it was going to go anywhere. I'm like, this will be this like cool thing that I do for this event because I don't want to deal with GMPs. I don't want to deal with all the things that you have to deal with as a supplement company, and now I'm
Yeah.
dealing with them. So,
Yeah.
but on the other side, it's also really rewarding to see Spagyrics like on the shelf at the grocery store. And I, don't
That's
know that I
awesome.
ever really thought that I would see that. So,
That's so cool.
but yeah, it was all mushrooms, that first line. And so it started with a line of 7, and we still offer it. We actually just got really nice boxes made for them of
Nice.
it's our planetary set of spagyric tinctures. That's 7 mushrooms, and those were the 7 that we started the line with. Sorry, it's 6 mushrooms and 1 lichen, which is
Oh, cool.
yeah. So
Mushroomy,
yeah,
half mushroom.
it is fungi,
Yeah.
part
Gimme
fungi.
fungal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I guess to back up for one moment,
yeah.
for listeners who might not really know, what is a spagyric and why do the planetary correspondences matter for spagyrics?
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, s- Spagyricism is derived from Hermetic alchemy as one of the practical approaches to laboratory alchemy. And what spagyric means on the most fundamental level, it's a term coined by Paracelsus. We've said his name a couple times now, but he was a Swiss physician, um, rabble rouser in the 17th century. I always get that
He was
messed up, but
bombastic.
he was bombastic. It's actually where we get the term bombastic because his name was Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim. And so, yeah, he was known for like going to the universities and like burning the texts and of the current medical system at the time, and talking a bunch of shit about the herbalists and the doctors that came before him and how they had a lack of understanding. Anyway, he could be a whole conversation in and of himself, but he liked coming up with terms in his practice, and he was really a renaissance for alchemy at that time too, because alchemy had gone through this kind of winding journey of like having really rooted practice in metallurgy and medicine and art and all these things, and then was persecuted by the Roman Church, went into Arabia, from Arabia back into Europe through Spain. And then in Spain, uh, as it came back into Europe, it was really tarnished by what are known as puffers. So the people who were kind of like, oh, yeah, I'll turn your lead into gold for you. And then people would give them a bunch of gold or give them a bunch of money, and they would disappear with it. And so for a long time, the alchemy as a practice and as a philosophy was really tarnished. And I feel like Paracelsus did a lot to really uh, revive alchemy as a true art and as a method of making medicine and not just a pursuit of riches or a pursuit of gold. But anyway, he came up with this term, spagyric, which is composed of the Greek spou, which means to separate, and a gyro, which means to recombine. I've also heard Greek people translate more accurately as to reawaken. And so I really look at spagyrics as like a living medicine from the alchemical world. And so what we're doing in the spagyric process is we're taking our starting material, in my case, mostly it's plants or mushrooms. We're breaking it down into its core philosophical principles, which have physiological representations. It's the salt, which is like a complex of mineral salts, the sulfur, which is like the essential oil or the essence of a thing. It's like the individual nature of a thing. In plants, it's an essential oil. In mushrooms, I would say it's kind of like oils that would be derived better from different types of solvents. And then the mercury, which is like the universal spirit of a thing. And so what our goal is that we're taking something that's whole, that's kind of gone through what Aristotle might have referred to as its like accidental form. So it might have kind of like been influenced by the natural world and kind of gotten these imperfections and these challenges across the way. And then what we're doing is we're breaking those things apart, purifying those principles, and putting them back together in what is now a more exalted form of that kind of like plant that had gone through those traumas, or those mushrooms who had gone through those traumas. And the way I remember Robert talking about it at one point was like, it's like you're tapping into the intelligence of not just that single nettle plant sitting on the top of that mountain where you harvested, but the whole intelligence of the genus of the plant, like the archetypal nature of that whole plant. And so the medicine making process is really in depth because there's a lot of ways that you can go about getting those three principles. There's a lot of ways that you can go about refining those three principles. And then there's a lot of ways that you can go about putting those three principles back together into making different things. And that's where it's really an art.
Hmm.
As I was mentioning earlier, where I look at it as like, hey, these are tools, and what you're doing is like you're building your toolbox, and then you can kind of like craft something unique from your own perspective. But where the doctrine of signatures and correspondences fits into that is, one, as we already talked about earlier, is like the relational understanding. I think for me, that's kind of like the most potent
Mm.
part, is like where is like how we deepen our understanding and relationally understand these different herbs and mushrooms. Because for me, there's so much that we rely on today because we can look at a book and we can see what somebody else wrote about that mushroom, or what somebody else wrote about that herb. And there's so much of like a barrier and a prevention of our own sovereign access to information, I would say. Um, to where
Yeah.
it's like it takes the relationship out of it, right? And one of the thoughts when I was really doing this, I was like, yeah, we're reading these ancient texts and we're looking at this information, but it's like, where did they get this information? It wasn't like, at a certain point, it's not like being dictated by anybody. I mean, as far back as you go, it was dictated to the earliest people by the gods. Um,
Hmm.
and the Neteru, which was nature, right? So I was like, at a certain point, it's like you can learn so much more about the potential of a thing through the observation of nature. And again, that's where the planetary archetypes and correspondences kind of fit in as like an organizational model to understand those things. And then you can also track it with the planetary placement in the sky. So you can get really specific as you're crafting something. And a lot of the more advanced alchemical works, for example, you would cast certain parts of the work at certain astrological timing. And you can even do it with the herbal works, right? It's like you were talking about your like hermetic garden that you were talking about cultivating, and it's like you could plant the seeds under a specific planetary influence to capture more of that energy. You can harvest under a specific planetary influence, or specific like seasonal influence, to harness more of that energy. Or, to our point earlier, you could use, say, like, one of the things that I think has kind of like a dual nature for me would be like cedar, which I think of as really like Jupiter ruled, but also like a Saturnian rulership as well. And so maybe you want to work with like the Jupiter aspects of cedar, so you'll harvest it under like a aspect where Jupiter is in a benefic place. Or
Yeah.
you can harvest on a Saturday to get the
Mhm.
Saturnic energy of the cedar kind of like captured in what you're doing. So I think there's like really infinite ways that you can put it together. But I really think of like when we're doing the work of like a laboratory alchemist and making these spagyrics and making these medicines, like distillation is such a huge part of it. And what we're doing is this like microscopic encapsulation of a macroscopic process. And so when you're capturing the process in the um your lab and your glassware, you get to pick the astrological timings, versus like when something passes or moves naturally, or like when you cut a plant in the wild, or when the plant naturally dies in the wild, it gives up the ghost and its soul leave its body and then are being cast at that time. But if you choose when you select that, you choose when you're putting it in the flask, you choose when you're doing that distillation, we're just copying the processes that are happening on a macroscopic scale. So
Mm.
it's like, instead of it going up, and like there's this term in like giving up the ghost, right? It's like when something dies, it starts losing its vitality. And instead of it giving up the ghost and that spirit and that essence being lost to the world and becoming part of the energy, is you're capturing that process. And so the top of the distillation unit is like the firmament or like the heavens, and it's like it goes up and then you're capturing it and you're bringing it back down to earth, and it's like crystallizing that intention into it.
Yeah.
So I find it
How
hard sometimes to like talk about these things in like a concise way that also is not like
you're doing
too
great.
abstract, but
No, I love it. Yeah, I know. It's like you could teach for 3 hours on what is a spagyric. So
yes,
yeah.
exactly.
And
So
you can spend your whole lifetime doing different kinds of spagyrics.
yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you could probably like work on one piece of that work, like one super refined process. And I've had nerdy conversations with friends where I'm like, we're like, oh, what if we had like a distillation train where we had like waters for each day of the week and then alcohol for each day of the week and like all, all these different things that again are just not practical on a commercial scale. So you
Yeah.
kind of have to like have the personal work and then you have the commercial work.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that you said was talking about how it's really more of an art than a science. I mean it's both. It's an art and a science
Yeah.
of making these medicines. Um and there's different ways to do it. And I think about even just a tincture. There's at least like 5 different ways of making a tincture that I can think of off the top of my head. And, all of them have validity and, you know, um some of them maybe incorporate more of the planetary intention. Like intention comes into play too, right? So there's like how you do it in the physical realm, and then there's also the intention going into it.
Yeah.
And one thing I was thinking about is like if you aren't intentional like with your medicine making and say you're making something like on an eclipse or something, like do you think that's like actually capturing that and going into that medicine and something we have to be like concerned about?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I would say, yeah, I would say, the other side, again, I think there's a lot of things, especially under like a modern understanding that we just don't understand the complexities of, we don't understand the challenges of, we don't understand like why you shouldn't be out during an eclipse or why you shouldn't be getting a surgery during an eclipse. That like traditional wisdom, whether it's from native people in the North
Yeah,
America or Ayurvedic traditions
yeah.
or medical astrology, and talks about that a lot.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think for sure. I think there's a lot of things in our modern society, and I think like that would be the least of my concern and kind of like what's going on in the modern supplement industry situation.
Right? Oh my
Um,
gosh. Yeah.
yeah, I think intention, like if you could have somebody who has intention in the products that they're putting together and is using real herbs and real mushrooms, like that's a win right there. Like, and if
Hmm.
those other things would probably influence it and how much, I also think it's just one of the complexities of life, right? It's like we're gonna step on things that are gonna affect us. We're gonna cross things that we shouldn't cross. We're gonna be affected by certain energies, whether no matter how careful we are, right? So it's like
Totally.
It's one factor.
it's one factor, right? Yeah, like um yeah, Paracelsus also has this really beautiful descriptor of all the different types of illnesses and kind of like the ends, the entities, and where they come from, and it's like physical and spiritual and of God, and there's these different types of kind of categories, and so I think that's also just part of being human, right? Is that we're going to kind of cross those things. So I think at the very least, like being intentional, but it's like most of the products that are on the shelf at your local grocery store, they don't even know if they've actually put mushrooms in their product. Like they can't
Yeah.
identify because they've got this mystery powder and they put it together. And so that's been one of the hardest things for me as like
It's
starting to
frustrating.
scale a company too, is like one, how do I scale this process that's like deeply intimate and deeply intentional and maintain that to a point that I still feel good about it? Because I agree, I think like for me, that relationship is a huge part of
Mhm.
what makes something effective. And I also like, I truly believe that our medicines are so effective, not only because we're extracting them well, but because we put that thought and intention into every part of
Yeah.
the process along the way. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think there's complexities to the world that I think most people are fully unaware of. And I think even of us who are aware of most of them are still unaware of a lot.
I know. Yeah.
And I think you just got to do your best, right? Because
Yeah,
like, yeah,
totally.
you're probably gonna take something that somebody made on a eclipse, whether it's food or medicine
Yeah.
or whatever, but maybe some of
Yeah.
those would have more of a potential to be challenging to you than others.
Yeah.
Totally.
It's really hard to factor in everything
Yeah.
astrologically, even with every decision, you know.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
good to do what you can. Do what you can.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and we just, I think you also have to remember is we live in such a different time
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Like I've got some friends who have gone through pregnancies and then trying to adhere to this traditional model where it's like you're not supposed to look at things that have passed away, and you're not supposed to cross certain things, and you're not supposed to like travel too far, and you're not supposed to be around, and there's all these things that are like, well, yeah, 150, 200 years ago when we were living in like much smaller village, some of that stuff was a lot more practical. And some of
Mm.
it you can still do, but like some of it is just like it's hard to do that in the
Right? Yeah.
modern life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I did have a question about medicine making, just in the sense of how it is, an art and a science, and there's different ways of doing things. Have you found a favorite way of making a double extract? Because there's ways of making a double extract that I've heard so many. There's multiple ways, and including it's like you have a batch of mushrooms that you tincture, and then you um, decoct that same batch of mushrooms and then combine that. There's a process of having two different separate dried batches of mushrooms that you decoct and then you tincture and then you combine, or you can tincture it and then decoct it, or you decoct it first, freeze it. So, long story short,
Yes.
any faves?
Um, there are infinite ways for sure. What I ended up landing on for our process through a lot of experimentation was I really like using a Soxhlet extractor. You guys might be familiar with a Soxhlet extractor. Some people
Yeah.
might not be familiar with a Soxhlet, but it's this really cool and simple passive system. It's kind of reminds me of a like a percolation on repeat,
Hmm.
because what you
Hmm.
have is this extractor, this chamber, and you fill it with your material,
Hmm.
and then there's a sidearm that comes out of the bottom and then goes down into the boiling flask. And so what you have is your boiling flask, and you boil your solvent. It goes up one of the sidearms, covers the material, and then once that's over full, it all drains back into the boiling flask. And so what happens is you're getting this more and more concentrated um, solution in the boiling flask, and you're getting fresh solvent over your material every time. So what it's doing is it's pulling more effectively. I like it for roots and mushrooms, more like
Hmm.
hardy things. I probably wouldn't use that process for like flowers just because the
Okay.
heat might be a little bit much.
Right.
Maybe under a vacuum you could do that, but
So it's like a
um,
super decoctor.
a super decoctor, that's a great way. Yeah, what the most simple way that I've thought about it too is like, when you do a standard tincture, you like cover your mushrooms or your herbs with your menstruum, whether it's water or whether it's alcohol, and then you let it sit there. And at a certain point, it just gets saturated. And the more tincture or color that your menstruum takes on, it's like it's becoming like full of the compounds of the mushroom. And so every time it's going to be less, as it gets darker, it's going to be less effective at pulling more from the mushroom.
Mhm.
So what I think of it is like you're like pouring fresh alcohol onto the material, shaking it around, dumping that off, pouring
Um,
more fresh alcohol off, and then you're collecting all of that like, so what you're doing is you're how would I say it? Like you're feeding like a hungry solvent every time. So
Mm.
the when you're putting that fresh solvent on there, there's nothing else in there. And so it's pulling as
Mhm.
much as it possibly can. And then by the
See?
end of our Soxhlet process, the menstruum is usually like really light or clear, and then you're kind of like, okay, I've gotten most of what I can out of there, which you can't see in a maceration process. So
Hmm.
I think
So
some of
you are
it's
using
spec.
alcohol in that process, but
Yeah,
you're heating the alcohol, or because you said there's
yeah.
a okay.
Yeah, and so I found that it works great under just like alcohol boils over at like 78 degrees Celsius, so it's a pretty low boiling point. Um, you can also pull a vacuum on that system, which helps you to drop the temperature even more. I haven't really found it to be that necessary to do that, other than to make the process more efficient, maybe. But
Mhm.
one of the reasons I landed on doing the Soxhlet in the first place was I was doing, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of experimentation with distillation of mushrooms, and I really wanted to like get essential oils from mushrooms, right, as part of the sulfur part of that spagyric process and the full spagyric extract. And I didn't ever really yield uh essential oils from the mushrooms through steam distillation anyway, but what we did get was like really potent hydrosols.
Mhm.
And so I was like, oh, that's all medicine that when you just are
Yeah.
like boiling it is like just going out. So I really like
Oh.
using the Soxhlet because it kind of keeps it even more intact and
Mhm.
captures more of those like subtle principles as well.
And what
Um,
percentage alcohol do you use?
yeah, so kind of back to your original question, I've done it both ways. I've done it where I've started with water. I've done it where I start with alcohol. I found starting with alcohol, especially through the Soxhlet, is more effective.
Mm.
It just has created stronger tinctures. They're like you don't have to worry about the tea fermenting in the
Right.
meantime, but just objectively the tincture has been stronger when I've made it that way versus the other way, and I've kind of played with both of them.
Cool. Hmm.
Um, and then I mean, I think the other things you asked are really kind of like a matter of choice to a certain degree. I always
Mm.
like double extracting the same material.
Hmm.
So we start with a 95% organic cane alcohol.
Yep.
And really, I mean, I feel like you could probably do this with most herbs because what you're doing is you're splitting the
Hmm.
uh like polar and non-polar solvent polar and non-polar solvents are pulling different sets of compounds. So like your alcohol, which is going to be non-polar, more non-polar, is going to pull polar compounds out of the material, and your water, which is going to be polar, is going to pull non-polar compounds out of the material. And so when you split the solvent completely, uh, we do this with mushrooms specifically because the variance in the compounds that are in the mushroom are just so wide
Right.
that if you do like you do with a lot of herbs and you're like, okay, well 60% is what I want for this because it's really terpene rich and blah blah blah, that's what I want more of, then you're
Mhm.
gonna miss something else in the mushroom where it's like the mushroom we really want those polysaccharides, which are going to be fixed compounds that are going to come through in the hot water extract more
Water,
so.
right.
And then you also really want those like phenols and sterols and terpenes that are going to oftentimes come through with the alcohol extraction. And so that's why we do both. I
Do the
would say
double.
exactly. And I would say you might get a more strong extraction. I mean, you're going to get a better ratio if you do fresh material for each part of the process, as
Okay.
you mentioned earlier.
But it's like
However, but
very
then
expensive and you're wasting potentially that.
you're wasting. I mean, what you could do is like and this might well, it might defeat the purpose, but what you could do is you could put some in your alcohol, put some in your water, two separate batches, and then swap them at the end, and then you've got crisscross and did all of it all at once. But
Yeah.
I don't really know if it's necessary. So I mean I think
But then
kind
you
of
would
to
have to
your
freeze that decoction potentially while you're waiting for your tincture extract to, so
exactly.
but
Yeah, well,
otherwise
and
it
that's
could
the
go
nice
just go bad. Yeah.
exactly, yeah, and that's another nice thing about the Soxhlet is like we turn like a 4 to 6 week process into like a couple days typically.
Yeah, that is really
Um,
cool.
And so then also, because I know people will do a cold water extraction of mushrooms as well sometimes. So then that Soxhlet is getting all that stuff too. Or
Yeah,
no?
well, so my understanding of why people choose or elect to do the cold water extraction is because they want to capture the enzymes from the mushrooms.
Uh-huh.
From my chemistry understanding, which is limited, so I could definitely be wrong on this, is that when you add that back into the alcohol portion,
It
it's just
just
going to
gets rid
be
of it.
yeah, it's just going to denature it anyway. So,
I don't find that to be as strong. Like it almost
yeah.
like waters down the other two.
Yeah, I think maybe if you wanted to take those enzymes and do something else with them or like make it kind of like its own thing. But my impression always has been like if you do enzymatic extraction like that, that you're going to basically make it ineffective once you put it into the alcohol solution. So
Yeah.
um,
Okay.
Right.
there's a lot of things, and I think the hard thing too is like we just don't have a lot of solid data behind a lot of it these days. So the best
Totally.
metric that I have to go off of is quality, right?
Yeah.
So I've
Yeah.
always kind of measured our tinctures by like what's the quality of them, and I
Mm.
also feel like I'm butting heads with the mushroom industry quite a bit because people are like, oh, well, like turkey tail doesn't need to be alcohol extracted. I'm like, well, yeah, but I've extracted turkey tail with alcohol and like I get a very strong tincture from it. So what that says to me more so than it doesn't need to be alcohol extracted is we don't yet understand what is being extracted with alcohol, which is
Mhm.
which is a lot of these mushrooms is like we're like, oh, well, you need to do lion's mane because of the erinacines and the hericenones and those are alcohol soluble, but the polysaccharides are water soluble. I'm like, you don't even know like, you don't really know what that means. Like, we know that there's some evidence that hericenones and erinacines in vitro studies increase nerve growth factor, but like, we don't, those are like two compounds or two classes of compounds out of how many hundreds or thousands of compounds that are in these mushrooms. To me, it's like
Yeah.
such a reductionistic approach. And
Yeah.
I think we're inheriting a lot of that from kind of like the cannabis industry, which to
Uh-huh.
me is kind of like a funny journey to
Totally.
refer to
I feel
because it's
like
like
yeah, I was just talking with Isaac. It's like the big fungi bros are kind of like the big canna bros. Like they're, like there's this industry that is just like selling. Yeah.
there's a lot of crossover and it's a lot of like,
Yes.
oh, but like terpenes and like this how many cordycepins does your cordyceps have, bro? And like it's like
Right?
and it's like, I'm really deep into the mushroom industry where I'm like interfacing with organizations and talking to like AOAC people about like developing standards for some of these things, but
Mm.
it's multifaceted because one, nobody has a standardized method for testing for any of this stuff. So that's one huge problem or gap. But two, I don't think we really understand like, cool, so it has hericenones. What's an actionable dose of hericenones? What do those
Hmm.
hericenones mean if you're isolating for them and you don't have the other compounds that are making the mushroom work? And so
The
I think it's just this
isolation
kind
part
yeah, and
really.
I always kind of like give the parable of the cannabis industry too because I to me it's hilarious. I'm like, "Oh yeah, you have this whole industry that is keep in mind studied like, one genus of plant for the past 40 years with like maybe a couple more species and like initially they're like, oh, it's the THC, no, it's the CBD, no, it's the CBN, no, it's the CBG, and kind of like all these things and go so far down the rabbit hole and isolating the different ones, and then they come back and they're like, actually, turns out if you put them all together, we're going to call it the entourage effect or just like the natural intelligence of the plant. Uh, they work better, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
yeah, we could have probably figured that out without that, but I think there's a certain amount of hubris that we have as humans, and I
The
don't know if that.
entourage effect.
The
It's really the entourage effect. Isn't that like that show from like remember
Yeah.
yeah.
to get back to the
Eh,
the kind of bros. But it also like talking about like that is really just like two, maybe three species in one genus.
Yeah.
Whereas
yeah.
mushrooms, like fungi, is a whole kingdom.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, we've had some clients that kind of come over from cannabis and they want the world. And I get like one thing I really appreciate is like they are very adamant about quality. So I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, that's great, but we have to like agree on how we convey quality because I think it's way more complex. And if you're like bowing to some of these ideas like, oh, we need to measure that because like that's the indicator of quality, I think you're missing out on a whole other scope of potential there. Um, but yeah, that's what I told them. I was like, they were like, well, why don't we understand yet? And I was like, you have to understand. And I calculated, I was like, man, it's probably been since the 70s or 80s that we've really gotten a lot of data on cannabis. And so it's like, 20, like 40 years that people have like studying that one plant in specific. And I'm like, now you're transferring to mushrooms. They've really only been like under the public auspice for like, for those of us who aren't aware, like the past 3 to 5 years, really. I mean,
Yeah,
before that, I feel like I was having to explain to people what a mushroom was, or it was automatically assumed that it was psilocybin.
I
And
know.
then, yeah, exactly. Within the confines of like the primary species that we generally work with, you're still looking at 10 to 15 different genus of mushrooms. That's different genus, not even different species. It's like they're
Mm.
totally different organisms and they're like so much more complex and there's a lot of different layers. So yeah, that's and luckily I feel like the people that I've been able, but it's an uphill battle of education on a lot of this stuff because it's
Yeah,
kind of like having to fight these mainstream narratives, which
yeah.
oftentimes like you look at them and you really analyze them and you're like, what are you actually saying? Or like, where is this really going? And I just saw even like a paper published yesterday by one of these big myceliated grain companies,
Mm.
um, that were like, look at the prebiotic effect of mushrooms. And I was like, well, yeah, but you're using oats. Like you're growing them on oats, and oats
Yeah.
have a prebiotic effect. And like you're not comparing the prebiotic effect of oats to these like oats fermented with mushroom mycelium or fungal mycelium. So it's like, how are you differentiating or how are you saying for certain that the prebiotic effect that you're getting in this study is not just from the
Nice
oats?
notes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
So, I feel like we talk about this with anybody who's into fungi on the show, but
yeah.
what do consumers need to look for as far as like finding good medicine, in general, like with the mushroom medicine?
Yeah. So I'm going to start this with a big caveat because I think a lot of people are like team fruit body or team mycelium.
Sure.
And I think that there is merit for both of them.
Hmm.
However, I will qualify that by saying from my perspective, fruit body is what we've been using. And I hate that I have to use the term fruit body. It's a necessity of the industry that's been created around it that I have to say mushroom fruit body. To me, it's like saying mushroom or like
You know.
nobody says apple fruit body of the tree,
All
right? It's like
right.
you call it an apple and it's like
Yeah.
scientifically from a mycological perspective, we're talking about the mushroom. We're talking about the reproductive organism of the fungi. So,
Yeah.
uh s- again, I digress on
Just
my
go
rant,
off. Love
my
it.
rants. But all of the research that we have on the benefits of mycelium is coming from mycelium grown in what's known as submerged fermentation. So they're basically like growing mycelium in a liquid broth, and then they're typically extracting that, drying it, usually extracting it with something like ether or hexane, and getting a
Oh,
super concentrate, and then using that in vitro. So that the studies that we see on the benefits of mycelium do not equate to the products that we see that contain mycelium, which are primarily myceliated grain, right?
right.
Either rice or oats.
So we're
And
talking
so,
about letting the oats, the myceliated grain is basically just letting the oats get covered with the mycelium until they're like intertwined.
yeah, yeah. So understanding the fungal life cycle is really helpful, right? So you've got like spores mate, they create hyphae create networks of what's known as mycelium. This is common of most fungal species will create some form of mycelium. And it's it's one cell wall thick, so it's very thin, and it's like a web-like material. Most people have probably seen mycelium. It's like when you take apart a log or you're walking through the forest and you see that kind of like web-like material on the ground. That's the mycelium. And so what happens is that in a cultivation setting, you either a lot of people will use what's known as grain spawn, which is like how we kind of like grow the mushrooms, but mostly as a method to spread them out. So
Mm.
what you do is you run the mycelium through either like oats or rice or something like that because it's really rich in sugars and those sugars help the mycelium to grow really fast. And then theoretically, once they run out of nutrients, then you need to spread it onto, and like you said, it's like that web-like material basically covers the oats. But again, it's one cell wall thick, and we don't really know like how much of, well, actually what we do know is that it's not fully converting the sugars in the product. So a lot of these kind of like myceliated grain products. And so when you're looking at a label, if it says other ingredients, rice or oats, if it says full spectrum, that's a term that's really popular. Um, and what they're saying is that it has mycelium, uh, mushrooms and primordia, which is like the beginnings of the mushrooms, but they don't really indicate how much of each of them that you
Mhm.
have, which
Right.
is, to me is problematic because it's like, well, yeah, you could put one mushroom into a 10,000 gallon batch of tincture and say like, yeah, it's got mushrooms in there. So what does that really mean?
Yeah.
So that's kind of like what you want to look out for. Like, does it say fruit body on there, or does it say mushroom mycelium or full spectrum? And
Mm.
it's getting really confusing because some of these big companies are really pushing for being able to use the term mushroom products on their products, even when they don't actually have the fruit
Fruiting
body in there.
body.
Because they're saying, oh, well, the consumer won't understand if we put mycelium product, or the consumer won't understand if we put. I've been pushing for the language fungi. And when we're talking about, these products, like, let's talk about them as functional fungi products. And like,
Yeah.
let's just be transparent with the language. Like, you can make whatever
Right.
you want, but let's be clear to people and the consumer.
Yeah.
Um, but in my experience, the fruit body has traditionally been what's used the longest amount of time,
Yeah.
right? It's got the most physiological action, just like you can taste the difference. And from my background in herbal medicine, it's like the taste is
That's an indicator.
it's an indicator of what the medicine is good for, right? It's
Right.
indicator that you're getting the benefits that you want. It's like that is like our own internal HPLC or HPTLC like scientific
Yeah.
analytic system is like we can taste it, we know that there's those beneficial compounds in there.
The
And if you
analeptics.
taste
Yeah.
exactly, and if you taste myceliated grain products, you can tell that they're either like not uh, oftentimes they don't have the same complex of terpenes and different compounds in there. And so what they end up tasting like is either like slightly sweet or they all kind of taste the same, which again, from like a vitalistic perspective of herbalism is like you're missing, you're kind of missing the mark on what exactly is you're looking for in there.
You use mushrooms in your personal practice and in your products, or
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, like I mentioned too, I had the benefit of like not having a profit driven prerogative, which I think is kind of like the source of a lot of the issues that we're up against. When I
Hmm.
started doing the experimentation, I was just trying to see what would happen. And I was aware that some people were using myceliated grain. I was aware some people were using fruit bodies. Um, so when I started feral fungi, the two things that I decided on when I started was I want to use 100% fruit bodies for our extracts. I'm also open to using mycelium if we could do a submerged for spoke about earlier, but nobody's really producing enough of it because it's so thin, it's hard to get enough material. It doesn't really hasn't really scaled to a commercial level currently. So 100% fruiting body and then domestically sourced was a huge other piece as
Nice.
well.
Yeah. Because they're
Which is
fumigating the fungi that come in
that's
from
probably
China.
like the least. I mean, yeah, I there's so many different arguments about it you can make, right? And there's so many different ways that people kind of like I would say on the positive side, right? China's been doing it forever. So they've been cultivating mushrooms for a very long time. They do grow and they do make some very high quality mushroom products. Not all their products are high quality. China will also kind of give you whatever you want. So if you want a cheaper product with X amount of cordycepan content, you'll get that. It doesn't necessarily mean it's coming from the mushrooms. So I will say
Mm,
that. Um,
mm,
I will also say like the main prerogative for me to uh source locally was like just the way that I think about medicine. It's
yeah,
like
that's yeah.
I'm like met like the further that it has to travel, like the medicine that's growing here, and then from a personal level of taking things that are nearer to you and the ecological
Mhm,
level of like the ecological impact of shipping hundreds of thousands of
mhm,
tons of herbs
mhm.
and mushrooms across the sea when we can cultivate them here just as easily.
Yeah.
And
Supporting, other businesses in that way.
Your local
that
economy.
yeah, the local economy is
Yeah.
a huge one for me because it's like what like why are we doing this? Like I'm
Mhm,
not I mean people probably have different prerogatives, right? And I know that business is complex and the higher up you get, people have different ideas and the bottom line is kind of it. And for me, I'm like I don't want to do this unless I'm doing it right. Like, I don't want to do this unless I'm supporting a local economy, unless I'm supporting a healthy ecology, unless I'm supporting like real medicine that works. Like that, if I'm not doing those things, then what's the point?
mhm.
Um, because I just being the person that I am, I just would not be able to s- do that. I just couldn't like
Yeah.
sell my soul for that.
Yeah.
And so it's been hard. I mean, when I started Feral Fungi in 2017, I think it was when I launched that product line, and I had been doing some of the pre-work before that, so 2016, 2017. Um, uh, it was hard to find 10 dried pounds of lion's mane. Like that was just kind of the nature of the market over here. It was hard to find dried mushrooms, but to your point, it's like I've cultivated relationships with so many different growers over the years that we have a lot of different resources that we work with. We have a lot of different people that I've met along the way that were early on their growing journey and now have like a really thriving farm.
Awesome.
And so it's like it's really beautiful to see because what I see too is like to me, herbal medicine is not only like uh, a practice, it's like it's revolutionary. And so it's like, how do we keep every part of it
Mm,
revolution? Like that's how I react, like respond to it. And like when I kind of stumbled across my herbal path, I was like, how do I make a meaningful impact? How do I like walk in this world in a way that is like truly revolutionary? Because I'm like, I see these systems in place. I largely disagree with a lot of them. What does
mhm.
it mean to be revolutionary in a way that's like actually going to be effective in the world? And like healing just kind of came up as like one of the main ones. And then if you can have direct access to those modes of healing, it's like that's to me one of the most central things we can do for rebuilding sovereignty and rebuilding people's ability to relate to the land and to themselves and to their family and to their community and um
Yeah.
Mhm.
so I think it's that was really important to me, and it's been beautiful to kind of like watch it grow to where, you know, at this point some months we're processing a few hundred pounds of dried lion's mane. And so like the amount of mushrooms that we're
Crazy,
going
man.
through is yeah, it's wild. So we never would have been able to do that from the start, but part of it is because we've been able to build relationships along the way
Mhm.
um
Yeah.
by
And grow
supporting
with
that local
those.
infrastructure.
Yeah, you're growing with them. You know, and you're supporting each other. Yeah.
Right.
That's awesome.
So
Yeah,
great.
and it also wouldn't have worked, right, if I came in with like a bunch of money or somebody came in and funded us or
Right.
something and we wanted to start with 10,000 gallons of something because it just wouldn't have worked. And I've had to talk clients down over the years because I've had people come to us and be like, I want 300 gallons a month. I was like, great. If you want 300 gallons a month, we can get there. It'll probably take, you know, 6 months to a year. We're going to need contracts with us. You're going to need contracts with the growers because like we have to support each other if you want to
Mhm.
get to that type of volume and
Right.
keep the quality the same and keep the systems intact. And like I'm willing to take that journey with whoever wants to take it, but also like not going to compromise. Like I'm not going to be like, "Ooh, they want this, so I'm just going to go buy a bunch of powders and dilute them
Mm,
in water and call it
mm,
good. Um,
totally. Mm,
Right.
so
Yeah. You can't like it's an organic growth that happens. You can't just
yeah,
like force it.
mm.
yeah.
Yeah.
And just one more thing on the myceliated grain part. Isn't like part of the problem that they're giving you in the final product more grain than mycelium also?
Yeah, so I think I started to kind of mention that, but the primary issue is, beta glucans are complex, right? And when you from mushrooms, you get 1,3,1,6 link beta glucans, which are a very specific type of polysaccharides that are most standard in fungi.
Hmm.
And then uh, different grains also give you polysaccharides, but the beta glucans that come from the fungi are different from the alpha glucans that come from grains. And what happens a lot of times is you'll see claims on packaging that says 30% uh, polysaccharide content. And like,
Mm.
great. How much of that is beta glucan and how much of that is alpha glucan? And they don't indicate. And a lot of the research that I know Namex has done a bunch of this type of research um, where they are looking at and they're like, well, yeah, but 30% of that, maybe like 5% of it is beta glucans and you know 25% is alpha glucans. I don't know the exact numbers, so I'm making them up, but that's kind of the gist behind it is that there's this kind of unregulated market. The other thing that I see a lot of times, even with fruit body extracts, is people saying, "Oh, my extract is like a 10 to 1." Like I see this one company that advertises all the times like 10,000 milligrams per serving, and it's like clear. And I was like, my, okay, either they don't understand extraction ratios, or
No?
they don't,
Even
or
at
they
1 to
don't.
10.
Maybe. I mean, I think our 1 to 10 extracts look stronger than that. But
Yeah.
anyway, I think that yeah, extraction ratio is a whole other issue. It's another, I mean, education in the supplement industry, especially with mushrooms getting so
Mm.
popular, is like an uphill battle in so many different directions. And I'm constantly having to be like, well, why is this twice as expensive as these Chinese powders or these myceliated grain products? And it's like, well, they're not processing it. They're really cheap to produce. The extraction ratio. And so you could arguably say ours is stronger, but like you can't quantify how much stronger because there's no meaningful way to do that. And
Right.
then even with like the ratio thing, we've had so many people that have come to us and been like, yeah, my current person is making us something that's 1 to 5 or 250 milligrams per milliliter or 500
Mhm.
milligrams per milliliter. And then we're like, take our full one, which is usually around like 350 milligrams per milliliter based off the weight of the dried mushroom, and then take
Mhm.
a take like a half strength one and just test them. And a lot of people come back and they're like, actually, your half strength one is like way stronger than most of what uh is on the market. And so again, I'm like,
Mhm.
these numbers don't really mean anything because it's like
Right.
going back to our extraction methods, it's like something that is soaked, you know, 500 grams that's soaked in menstruum for 1 minute versus 500 grams that's soaked in the menstruum for 8 weeks is the
Yeah.
same ratio, but is it the
Right.
same effectiveness? And so I think that's another
Another good
issues of
point. Yeah, we don't
yeah.
have on the label how long did that sit in that menstruum? Were you agitating it? Were you like,
Was it there for a
Exactly.
minute?
yeah.
Exactly. You need like the full pull down menu, and it would be exhaustive to try and do that for every product. And so
Mhm.
again, it's like we really rely on quality, but that's hard from a marketing perspective because people are like, well, this one's half the price. And like,
Mhm.
well, yeah, go ahead, buy the half price one. It's like it really is up to you. But um
You're going to end
I
up probably
I
wasting more money in the long run because it's not going to be as effective. You might need more. It might.
Well, yeah, and I was talking to somebody yesterday, and that's exactly it. I mean, what happens, I think, is overall detrimental to herbal medicine and natural medicine because you get
Right.
these people that buy these cheap supplements that aren't made with real herbs, that aren't made with real mushrooms, and they're like, they don't work.
I
I'm
know.
like,
It's so damaging.
Well, of course they
yeah,
I've heard
don't.
that so many times from my
exactly.
customers at market, and They're like, yeah, I tried turmeric, but it's like, well, was it an expired capsule from Nature's Way from,
Yeah.
like
10 years ago.
10 years ago that didn't
Yeah.
have
In
black
a
pepper?
warehouse.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Or like a pure curcumin extract that's like giving you
Yeah.
liver damage. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, one other thing about the like products too is that I'm seeing like mushroom powders that haven't actually been decocted or cooked at all, and they're like, just like dried mushrooms ground up, and I'm like, are you gonna put that in a smoothie now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's problematic from multiple sides, right? Because
Yeah.
like people, yeah, putting it in a smoothie, like what's the microbial content? What's the like if you don't have a kill step, which is like effectively tincturing is like a kill step, that product is now potentially dangerous for people. Like
Yeah.
if they aren't clearly indicating that you need to like boil it in hot water or do some sort of
Right.
like process. I mean, all the big tea companies or even like small tea companies, like you sell dried herbs, but it's never with the under the auspice that you're just going to be like eating dried herbs. It's like you're gonna
Right.
make
And do
them
the
into
tea.
tea or you're gonna
Mhm.
make a tincture out of them or
Yeah.
whatever. And so that's one issue for sure. Also for mushrooms, it's like you have to process them for them to be
Yeah.
effective. Whether even if it's just a like you mentioned, like I've done some extracts where I like just do a hot water extract and then I dry everything back down onto itself and it's a
Mhm.
powder
Mhm.
again
Yep.
like a one-to-one powder, but you have to break down the cell wall because our body doesn't create enough chitinase
Mhm.
to break down the cell wall of the mushroom, which is primarily made of chitin, like the same material as our fingernails, same materials like crustaceans. And our body just doesn't have the capacity to break it down. So if we just eat dried mushrooms, it's like you're not really going to get much of the benefit from them.
Mhm. Or even
As
fresh
a
mushrooms, like at the salad bar at the
Yeah,
Friendly or
exactly. Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Like
Yeah,
people are
you
like, oh,
need to
I don't
cook
like
it. You
mushrooms. I'm like, did you try it raw at the salad bar?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like you need to cook them or hot water is like the basic like what
Mhm.
you need to do. And then I mean, I think the other thing that has been coming up a lot for me as well is like I don't think we really quite understand the difference in absorption between powders that have to go through traditional metabolic pathways and tinctures that go through um, are more aptly absorbed through the mucous membranes in the mouth.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so I'm curious to see more research on that coming out so hopefully some point because my thing is like we're also competing with all these companies that are like, yeah, 30% beta glucan content. It's like, great, but how much of that is your body really metabolizing? And how do we know that, you know, your body's not more effectively metabolizing a smaller amount that's going to be inherent in a tincture that's not as concentrated versus what like you're eating the powder, it's going through your digestive tract, a lot of it's being broken down and then it's processed through the liver and like what of it is making through the gut associated lymphoid tissue, like what percentage, we just don't really know, right?
You're
And
getting like
so
the fiber that way.
you're getting the fiber that way for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
And I think there's probably benefits and merits to both, right? But I think
Mhm.
to me, there's a lot more questions than we have answers to. And unfortunately, everybody likes to posture like they have the answers. And that to me is problematic. And what I know, again, kind of going back to like what I can judge our extracts on is like, do they work? Like
Yeah.
like is the taste strong? Can you taste it? And do
Yeah.
they work? And like, I just don't think you can beat anecdotal evidence at
Hmm.
this point in a lot of ways, even though it oftentimes gets written off. But we've
Yeah,
I
seen
love that
there's
point.
so many ways to
miracles.
fudge, the studies. The studies aren't comprehensive enough, and yeah, like you when you taste a tincture that has been prepared with the
Yeah.
fruiting body and has been in that way, like you can taste the
Yeah.
effectiveness.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's hard too because I think most anybody can just publish a paper with enough money these days, and
Mhm.
they
Right.
can most oftentimes just get it to say whatever they want. That
Yeah.
and not
There's
enough people.
the replication crisis.
Yeah.
Exactly. And not enough people are scientifically literate enough to be able to look at that abstract read the abstract, read the methods, read the conclusion, and understand what it means. And you're like, hey, here's this paper and it says that this thing does this. And you're like, well, yeah, but that doesn't equate to like what you're saying over here. Or like I've seen big mushroom people be like, look, and here's all this research on how mycelium is so beneficial. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not the same as like the product that you're selling over here, but you're making it sound like
Yeah,
it's the same thing as your
that is a
product.
huge
Right.
pattern.
Yeah, like with
Yeah.
the mycelium in the brine, rather than
Yeah.
the
Yep.
oats.
Yep. Exactly. Yep.
So,
Yeah.
just before we get, I would like to ask a little question about like Chinese herbalism too, because like as you were saying with European herbalism and Ayurvedic herbalism, mushrooms aren't really used. So it's a
Yeah.
new thing in our culture, but there is this history of use in China for a long time.
Hmm.
So have you delved into that for how in your research in how to make mushroom medicine?
Yeah, totally. Well, primarily for a deeper understanding of the mushrooms themselves, because yeah, the
Okay.
mushroom materia medica is definitely much more rich through the Chinese perspective. I haven't personally studied TCM or Chinese medicine, so my primary modes of herbal medicine have been Western herbalism from primarily like a vitalist perspective, and then Ayurveda. and and then there's a lot of adaptations these days of kind of working with herbs that weren't traditionally part of those materia medicas and incorporating them
Yeah.
as part of those materia medicas. But you do have some Western instances, like Dioscorides described agarikon in his materia medica. But Chinese by far have the most comprehensive materia medica, and so I use and history of use, and so I use that as kind of like the foundation of teaching about the traditional and the historical use of medicinal mushrooms. There's also I'm gonna shout him out again, but I shouted him out a while ago on the last talk I did, but I'm gonna show everybody as well. But this book
Mm.
is fantastic. It's just Medicinal
Ooh.
Mushrooms by Martin Powell. And I think he's got a background in traditional Chinese medicine. But one thing that I really liked about his work is that he included like the energetics of each of the mushrooms as
Ah,
well.
yeah, that's
Nice,
so
And
nice.
important, especially for
it's
correspondences.
exactly, yeah. And I was having to kind of like figure out before I had found this book. And he also gives like a really beautiful breakdown on polysac. I mean, this book is like it's been one of my favorites
Nice.
that I've come across. And it was funny. I was like putting together a guide for the last talk that I did, and they're like, "Can you send us some resource on medicinal mushrooms?" And I was like, "It's funny, all these books are just called medicinal mushrooms. There's like four or five of them that
Yeah,
all
that's
just are
that's
called
true. I
medicinal
know, like the
mushrooms."
Christopher Hobbs. But the Radical
Yeah.
Mycology book that you were a contributing author for is one of my favorites. Like
Oh yeah, that
that's an
one's
amazing.
a fun one. Yeah. Yeah, I was recently talking to Eric Lohman from Myco Wizards, and he was like, what's next? Like, what's the next one? Because that's really been the last like big publication on
Yeah,
mushrooms in that
yeah.
space. And so
So maybe this Martin Powell book is part of that next week. Like,
I think the Martin Powell book was before
oh, was it? Okay, all right.
yeah, I think it was before Radical Mycology, but
It's new to you. Like,
yeah, well, it's just on my desk.
oh,
I've had it for probably like over 10 years at this
oh,
It's
point.
okay,
just
my
it's
bad.
stood
Yeah, yeah.
up. It's stood up
Yeah,
over
It's
time.
gotcha,
it
gotcha.
stood the test of time for sure. Yeah.
All right, I'm catching up
Um
here.
all good. Yeah, but yeah, Peter's book is great, and I love the scope of it, where it's not many people are going to pick that book up and read it from cover to cover,
I
right? It's
didn't.
going to
Yeah,
be, yeah, it's more of like a reference book, or you find
yeah,
the sections that are more appealing to you. But
yeah.
I also love how he kind of made it like a collaborative effort. So like I got to write my piece in it,
That's
and
so cool.
various other experts also contributed their voices to it, making it more of like an anthology, which is really
Mhm.
in the spirit of radical mycology. So I really
Mhm.
love
Yeah,
that too.
it's a
Yeah.
community effort.
Yeah.
Um, so to go back to the doctrine of signatures and these
Yeah.
correspondences, do you think we get a little bit into like some of the specific mushrooms and their astrological correspondences?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite things to do. So I kind of like put a caveat on this as well. Like you mentioned earlier, it's like I'd probably give a 3 hour talk on Spagyric. I could probably give a 3 hour talk um on the Doctrine of Signatures and Correspondences. But so when I was initially looking into it, as I mentioned earlier, the only resource that I could find was really Culpeper, and he just mentioned, I think it was Agaricus ruled by Mars and Aries, and didn't give an explanation why. I mean, my Agaricus is notably like uh powerful, and just like the way that mycelium grows where it like busts through concrete and like has that kind of force. So I was wondering if it was like something to do with that. Um, Maybe there was like a mercurial aspect as well. But anyway, I didn't really find much. So when I started, I was kind of like, okay, well, like, plants often we refer to the plant kingdom as ruled by the sun, oftentimes as kind of like they
Mm.
are driven by the sun, they follow the sun in a lot of ways. Mushrooms, I would say, opposite to that would be, as a whole, their kingdom would be more like lunar ruled,
Yeah.
just because they are so watery and so like um their growth patterns more awfully follow lunar cycles. And um the only person that I could find that had anything was Robert Rogers. In the back of Fungal Pharmacy has this small section called the alchemical processes in mushrooms, and it kind of he aligns
Oh.
the alchemical processes with mushrooms. So I had reached out to him and was like, "Hey, like, what do you think about this? Like, doctrine of signatures and correspondences?" And the first one I think that I really thought about was shiitake.
Oh,
Mm.
cool.
And I think when I was thinking about it, it was like all of this information was coming out at the time about how if you stimulate shiitake with lightning, that it like flourishes, and thinking about how shiitake was one of the
Cool.
first mushrooms that we were able to cultivate.
Hmm.
It's so like plump and
Yes.
um abundant. And
Hmm.
I feel like you guys already have a sense of where I'm going with this.
Jupiter.
Jupiter,
Yeah.
Jupiter, and the lightning kind of got me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I love like this is probably like one of my favorite things is breaking people's minds open with like the days of the week and how the middle of the week is taken from Norse mythology. So we
Yeah.
kind of have these like all the days of the week are inherently tied to the planets that they're ruled by. So Thursday, Thor's day, Thor was traditionally
Jupiter.
ruled by Jupiter. And so it's always like I feel like a really simple piece that also people are just like, I've never thought about that before. But I
Totally.
love that. Like I love digging into like the Picatrix and like the
Mhm.
sources for all of this stuff, and like why is it like that? Why do we use the um anyway, I digress again. But so Jupiter, yeah, so that was kind of the first one. I was like, hey, I really feel this strong association. And I think he was talking about how he had worked with some alchemists in Italy who also worked with shiitake under Jupiter. So that was kind of the first one. And then I went into some of the others that were favorites at the time. Reishi would be a central one, especially talking about Chinese medicine and not only like traditional use, but iconography in that culture. And so I look at the mushrooms. I feel like I briefly touched on this earlier, but kind of like talk about it again. I'm looking at the morphology of the mushroom. So what does it look like? What does it grow like? I'm looking at the action, like what specific organ systems does it have affinities to, and what kind of energetic action does it have? Is it warm, cool,
Mhm.
moist, dry? And then any other kind of like morphological or like what kind of tree is it growing on? What kind of environment is it like? Things along those lines.
Mm.
So reishi, I felt like was reishi and lion's mane to me were like two of my favorite and like easy to do
Yeah.
because they're just so like okay, for sure they're that. I would say reishi has a very strong solar influence.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think of like the reishi as being like the 10,000 year mushroom or the mushroom of vitality, and it's like
Yeah.
Yeah.
the sun is the center of our solar system, and it's like shining the light out onto the rest of the planets in the solar system. And even if you look at the way that it grows, especially traditionally in the kind of like
Totally.
conch shape, and it's like dark in the middle, and then it's like lighter, and then it's orange, and then it's yellow, and then it's white, and it's
The
literally
rays of the sun
radiating.
like radiate. Oh, I love that. Yeah.
And then it's like it's got such a, again, reishi is one of those ones that it's like used for literally everything. And it's one of the mushrooms that I actually am like, oh yeah, this is something that I would literally give to anybody for literally everything.
Yeah, no, for
Uh, but it also
of
has like a
immortality.
really strong affinity for the heart, right?
Mm.
Which
Yeah.
the sun rules the heart, and then it
Mhm.
also has a really strong affinity for the eyes, and I think the right eye, if I remember correctly, is under the rulership of the sun.
And in general, eyes are sun because you see
Yeah.
with your eyes, and the sun is what
Exactly.
illuminates everything. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's just like that to me was like a perfect matchup. I think if I was to give it like a secondary, I would also probably consider like a Jupiter as like
Yeah, I was like, it's
a
either Jupiter or
secondary.
Sun. I don't like. I was thinking Sun, but yeah, I was like, Jupiter would be the
And
second.
it's a spiritual herb. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
spiritual mushroom
Yeah,
too. Yeah. So and
Yeah. Yeah,
that
yeah.
sun with Jupiter,
yeah,
sun is very spiritual, like the inner spirituality.
Yeah, 100%. So I felt like that one was a really easy one, and then Lion's Mane was another really easy one. I mean, Lion's Mane direct relationship to both the stomach and the brain, and the nervous system. So, and it's just like white and plump
yeah.
and watery,
Juicy,
like
watery.
Mushy.
90%
Yeah.
water. Yeah. And
Yeah,
so
Gotta be the moon.
it's got to be the moon, right? Like
Yeah.
I think there's an argument, especially with how effective it is for the nervous system, that there's some like mercurial aspect to it as well.
I
Sure.
Um,
exact. That was the secondary. I was like, is it gonna say Moon or Lion or
Mercury.
Mercury?
Yeah, but I think moon for sure, because
Yeah,
moon rules the stomach,
yeah,
moon rules the breasts, moon
yeah.
rules the brain specifically, but a brain
Mhm.
is part of that network of the nervous system.
Right.
And then it's like the emotion, it's like the
Mhm.
feeling, and I feel like that by the ways that the lion's mane regulates, and then it's so like cooling and moist with how much moist water it has going on. And that's another note, just kind of like in general with the mushrooms as well, is I've found that even with the actions, I kind of use them as a guiding principle. But the cool thing about mushrooms is that I haven't found any of them that are going to like act like cayenne will, or like poppy will, where it's like if you take too much cayenne, you're gonna way overheat your system, or you can't give it to
Yeah.
somebody who's already got a hot constitution, or
Right.
poppy is like gonna be so cooling that it's cold. And I find even when I'm talking about mushrooms having energetics of being like cool and moist or hot and dry, it's like they're typically not so hot and dry or so cold and moist that they're going to aggravate somebody's inherent constitution, which is another benefit
Yeah.
of working with fungi, is that they seem to be pretty adaptable. And I would even say, like, I've talked to one of my friends about it too, of saying like there's an intelligence to them too, right? Where it's
Yes.
like reishi, for example, where we talk about like the immune system. And when you look at a bunch of herbs, you typically either get immune stimulants or immune depressants. You don't often get immune modulators, but mushrooms are modulators. And I would say that is true for the immune system, but I would also say for lion's mane for the nervous system as well. Um, like
Totally.
it's like a nervous system modulator, because I've had people with overactive nerves that have like burning, tingling sensation. I've had
Yeah.
people that can't feel the nerves. I've had everywhere in between, and lion's mane seems to like go right there and kind of like
I
fix
love
it.
that
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah. So I like to, I think about the mushrooms as being, uh, having that sort of intelligence, whereas like plants tend to have like a much more specific action, and
Hmm.
tend to be like a lot more like, and there's ways like formulation, right, is like a great way that you can kind of like modulate some of those actions, and kind of like if you're using a really hot herb, you can use a cooler herb to kind of cool it down. And
Yeah.
um
But mushrooms in
uh
general, and like the food to medicine scale, are a little bit more on the food side where they're safe and they're not going to be completely throwing somebody off balance, even though they are a very effective medicine.
The edible
yeah.
one. But yeah, but
Yeah.
like Amanita.
Not
Okay.
entheogens, like, but yeah, the
Yes.
entheogens are more on the other side.
I would agree with that. Yeah, and well, in traditional Chinese medicine too, those ones that are traditionally used as medicine are considered superior herbs in the TCM model, which basically means that you can take much larger doses over a much longer period of time without negative consequences, where that's oftentimes not the case with different herbs. You usually want to like cycle off of them or only take them for specific instances. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for turkey tail, would you say that's Mercury?
that's a great question. I really like turkey tail under Venus.
I was
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
thinking because of the variegated colors of turkey tail.
Yes. Yeah. So I would say that there is certainly like a mercurial aspect to it. So I work with turkey tail. One of the like main points of research on turkey tail is its effectiveness in breast cancer.
Yeah.
And I also find that there's a very strong correlation with turkey tail reproductive system. So I typically work with it in the genitourinary tract, especially in females, but both
Yeah.
really in men and females. And I would say like Venus is being kind of like a ruler of that feminine. And then I look at the colors
Sure.
on it of this like that very color of like beauty, right? And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
I
That's
also
nice.
look at it how it kind of is like it looks like a bunch of different mushrooms, but you look really close and they all kind of like flow into each other, and there's that kind of like flowy, like sultry nature of it. So I I,
Mm.
I primarily work with turkey tail under Venus for that capacity. That's one of my favorites, but I think that the
Who's your
Mercury is a
mercurial mushy?
so for in our planetary set, Usnea is
Oh,
our
cool.
Okay.
Mercury. Um, Again, perfect. Like Mercury rules the respiratory system, rules the nervous system. Um, I look at like the Usnea, and when you kind of pull it apart, and it has
White
that kind of like
thread.
stretchy thread in there.
Yeah.
It's one of the best herbs that I've found to be supporting like upper respiratory health.
Mm. It's incredible.
And
And because it's a lichen, it's kind of like this intermediate
Love
being,
that.
yeah,
and like
yeah,
that's totally a mercurial thing.
Totally.
totally. And I mean, I think it makes sense that that's our Mercury in our first set. And that's also why I called the company Feral Fungi, is because I didn't want to be bound to
Uh-huh.
just mushrooms.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, there's a whole dynamic to the feral aspect of it, but yeah, I think that that makes even more sense with it being a part of our initial line representing Mercury. I also really like oyster mushrooms for Mercury because I
Mm.
feel like they're so dynamic. People are
Yeah.
primarily using them for food, but they'll grow on anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So and they grow so fast, and then they
Yeah.
are used in like so many different applications, all,
Mm.
from cleaning up oil spills to like remediating soil to like food to medicine. And so they just have this kind of like ubiquitous type of nature about them. Also strong effect on kind of like nervous system and the mood.
Mhm.
Um,
Mm.
yeah, so
Okay, so Saturnian, are we
We're gonna
going
go. Yeah.
Chaga or
okay, so yeah, these are these are some of my favorites. Let's start with Mars because
yeah,
um Mars, I really like red belted conch.
yeah,
Ah.
Is this
Okay.
was one of the first mushrooms that I was experimenting with a bunch, but I also think it's kind of like dual natured, and it's funny to me because it's kind of like dual in both the malefics, where I think it's definitely got like a strong Mars Saturn um
yeah.
Yeah.
kind of dual nature to it.
Mm.
But definitely like it's very bitter, but when you process it, it's so rich in oleo resins that the whole tincture, so this was one of the first ones that I was experimenting with, excuse me. And the tincture, I had like a black alcohol tincture and a black water, and I mixed them together, and this was pretty early on, and it immediately turned like cream colored. Like
Yeah,
it looked like a latte. And I
yeah.
was like, oh no, I've added them backwards, because like if you add the water to the alcohol percentage like precipitates out polysaccharides. And so I was like, oh
Right.
no, I must have like done this backwards. And so I've like
That's just how it is.
did it the other way, and I was like, oh
Yeah.
no. So what happens is that the alcohol extraction is so thick in oleo resins, like the alcohol extraction is
Mm.
like sticky, and then it
Mm.
turns this color that it just the color reminds me of Mars. And
Mm.
traditionally, red belted conch is used for as like a styptic in the environment, so used for helping to kind of seal wounds. I use it internally for a lot of digestive health and for inflammation and for muscle
Oh,
support. And so like
cool.
all of those things very like martial dynamics, but it's also got that kind of like sealing and binding, like that even that styptic quality,
Mhm.
right? Is kind of like, yeah, there's the wound aspect, but then there's also the Saturnic aspect of kind of like binding it
Tightening
and
Yeah,
and
and it
tightening.
has literally a red belt of Mars, but then
yeah.
it's so
Exactly.
hard. It's like the
Yeah.
hardness of Saturn, and also it's very long lived. So
Yeah.
that's Saturn too. So that's
Mhm.
pretty cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mostly work with it under Mars, but I definitely it was and that was one of the ones too early on where I was like, oh, there's like I bet this would be really good for something like leaky gut where you're getting this kind of like digestive inflammation. And it's one of the best mushrooms that I've ever found for digestive health. Like I've had
Cool.
people who are like, I've got chronic digestive issues. Like I've taken everything from herbs to pharmaceuticals and like this, or it's like one of the main mushrooms in our digest formula too. But they're
Mm.
like, this mushroom is like, save me. And again, that's
I
just part
love
of like
that.
the benefit of lived experience where you're like, here,
Yeah.
try this. Like, I don't know if it's going to help. Try this
Yeah.
thing. And you don't
Mhm.
have really expectations of whether or not it's going to work. And you get to learn
Mhm.
how effective something can be,
Mhm.
which
Yeah.
again, just you can't learn as effectively through a book.
Yeah.
Um,
No, yeah. The experience, and Culpepper even says, experience is the most important thing.
Hmm.
You know.
yeah. All right. And then so
Lastly,
Saturn in our planetary set, I do artist conch. Um,
Okay.
nice.
Okay.
so me and my friend, when I was like kind of doing some of this stuff, they're still like a client of ours, but we were chatting a lot and like meditating, doing a lot of plant meditations and a lot of mushroom meditations and stuff at the time. And we were both like, man, there's this like ancientness to artist conch. There's this like timelessness that artist conch has, and then the way that it grows in these like really flat concentric circles. And I mean, a lot of the conch mushrooms kind of grow like that. You could argue probably like conch mushrooms in general have some strong correspondence to Saturn.
Yeah.
Um, and then there has like I've seen a lot of research too, specifically artist conch used in like musculoskeletal type
Mm.
Okay.
of
Mhm.
conditions, spleen conditions. So
Nice.
the associations with that. Let's
Sweet.
see.
Okay.
Was that all of them? Sunday,
Yeah.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Yeah, we just did all of them.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
And I know that we've been talking for 2 hours.
Yeah.
So we should probably wrap this up, but thank you so much, Jason. This has been so fantastic, and I really like your style of making medicines and explaining mushroom medicine. So really appreciate your time today. It's been so fun.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
people find out more about you, get your products, and see what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I absolutely love what you guys are doing, and like you motivated me to pick up this aphorisms on astrology and magic, which I actually have sitting right here. It's like beautiful. Like so, I
Yeah.
love a good, beautiful
Mhm.
magic book. So, yeah, great to connect with you both. Love what you guys are doing as well. We're making mushrooms. Feralfungi.com is kind of like our main gig. We also do most of our business is actually manufacturing for other companies. So we help a lot of people who want to bring a quality product to people, but don't want to build a manufacturing capacity. I sort of
Mhm.
accidentally stumbled into it. So it kind of like oftentimes will be like, hey, yeah, I know you love making medicine, but if you want to grow that side of your business, do you really want to invest all that time and money? And so we're trying to kind of like be a balance of like offering people some like really high quality, really intentional medicine. We make people spagyrics, we make people more simple extracts. I do have a site called alchemmycology.com that is fairly poorly maintained, but my goal this year and for the last number of years has been to do more engagements like this and more education and getting back out into the world a little bit. I've just been so kind of like in
Doing the
my own
thing.
world for a while, doing the thing and making it go,
Mhm.
but I love being out and talking and
Come to
chatting
our
with people.
conference,
So,
Plant Cunning Conference in the summer. We're doing it the last weekend of July. If you want to,
oh, awesome.
I know it's like the opposite side of the country, but it's in vibe in line with your intention.
Yeah, 100%. Well, yeah, I'll definitely keep an eye out for that and maybe I'll touch
Sweet.
base with you guys, but
Yeah.
I'm just super grateful to be connected with you both and like have people that I can have these conversations with
Mhm.
because with everything else that goes on, I feel like these are the things that really like feed my spirit, and so I
Yeah.
really enjoy
Yeah.
it.
Yes. Thank you so much, Jason.
Yeah, thank you so much for being a part of this project, and
Yeah.
we're so glad to connect with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Great. Cheers.
Cheers.
Have a good day.